the life of your trust, the death of your trust. Then the trust is dead. And then you don't know what's ever going to happen.
That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Watch the video to find out how it really works.
Hey guys, this is Dave Tim from the Learning Firearms channel. With us in the shop is special guest Ben Rust. He is a Minnesota Gun Trust attorney extraordinaire. And what we're going to be talking about in this video is that not what I talked about before. I don't really know the lives and deaths, but Ben does, and that's why he's here. So we're going to talk about during the lifetime of the trust. You know, how does that affect when everybody's living and going well, good times, but sadly sometimes in life bad things happen. People are incapacitated or ineligible, or people die. And that's, you know, it's important to kind of realize what happens with the trust. So that's what we're going to talk about in this video. So we've talked about who should be in your trust and what roles they should play during the lifetime of the trust. And that is as long as the grantor is alive, right?
Correct.
Okay, so during the lifetime of your trust, how do you deal with, let's talk about transfers. How do we deal with those?
Transfer with the NFA is broadly defined, and basically anytime there's someone who is not a trustee of the trust and they're in possession of a firearm that the trust owns, and again we're talking NFA Class 3 firearms here, not just your regular rifles, pistols, and shotguns. Anytime they're in possession of an NFA firearm and there isn't a trustee with them, that looks like a transfer. Okay. And whether it actually is or not, you're going to have a trial to really decide that for sure. But you don't ever want to get in that situation. So basically, make sure that there's always a trustee either in possession, constructive possession, or it's locked up somewhere, or where only a trustee has access to that NFA firearm. Let's
talk about traveling. What if a trustee, has a suppressor and they want to take that to a range or maybe a training class out of state? So let's break that down, maybe in-state and out-of-state, because there is a difference, you know, as far as the NFA is concerned.
Sure. In-state, you can move wherever you want to go as long as it's legal. There are some states where, you know, if you go into the wrong city, that city may have an ordinance that bans that particular type of firearm. So you do need to be somewhat careful. But in Minnesota, state law preempts local firearms laws. So in Minnesota, you can bring that suppressor anywhere you want to go inside the state of Minnesota. When you leave the state, there's really nothing that changes. The only thing that you really need to think about there is make sure that the state that you're going to also does not prohibit firearms. Okay. Iowa and Illinois currently prohibit silencers, so you cannot bring your suppressor to Iowa. You can drive through Iowa. The Firearms Owners Protection Act covers that. It needs to be locked in a case in your trunk or the rearmost part of the vehicle. But as far as going to Iowa and shooting your suppressor, it's not going to happen, at least for the near future.
What about not an item that's a suppressor? Like, what about a short barrel rifle and they want to take that to a cabin in Wyoming?
For those sorts of things, suppressors and AOWs, you do not need permission to travel out of state with them. For the other 4 types of NFA firearms, machine guns, short barrel rifles, short barrel shotguns, and destructive devices, you need ATF approval beforehand, before you leave the state with it. And you get that approval on a Form 20. It takes about a month to get them back. It doesn't cost anything to send it to the ATF. There's no fee like there is for a transfer tax. And they're good for up to a year. You'll see on the form itself, you can put the from and the to dates. So you tell them where you're going, what firearms you're bringing, and during what time period the travel will occur. And they will either approve or deny that. If you leave the state without that approval, you're going to have a bad time if you ever run into law enforcement. And if you're flying with one, you will need that Form 20. So, for example, for a suppressor, that Form 20 would be very helpful if you're flying. It says right on the Form 20 that is sort of the authorization for them, the airline, to take your bag with a suppressor in it while you're on the airline.
Okay. So for suppressors and AOWs, if you're driving, no prerequisite. You can travel freely throughout the states where it's legal.
Where it's legal, where the state law does not ban possession of that item.
Okay, but to fly with a suppressor, Form 20.
Form 20.
Okay. Now, the other types, we need a Form 20 before you can leave the state.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. I would actually recommend that folks get a Form 20 even if they're traveling out of state with a suppressor or an AOW, just because of the reason that it's a lot easier if you ever have an encounter with law enforcement. It's a lot easier to show them your permission slip. It didn't cost you anything, and you're not going to have to explain the fine points of the National Firearms Act to someone on the side of the road. It's going to get you on your way a lot faster if you just show them your permission slip.
Sure. Now, speaking of law enforcement contacts, that is something that a lot of people have questions about. Now, I'm on one side of the table on that because I work in law enforcement, and I'm very knowledgeable when it comes to gun laws. And I would say, as a whole, the law enforcement community is trying to really be a lot better at it. But some cops aren't as familiar with NFA as maybe they should be. So what is some advice that you would have to a trustee or the grantor if they are traveling or if they're at a shooting range and now they do have a law enforcement contact? You know, what things do they need to have with them, and what should they say to that law enforcement officer to help them get through that contact smoothly?
Well, first of all, it would probably be fairly unlikely that they'd ever end up in that sort of a situation. But if you do, the paper that you need with you would be proof that the trust exists, either a copy of the trust itself or a certificate of trust or the equivalent in your state. It's basically a summary of the trust that's legally binding. A copy of the tax stamps, the Form 4, the Form 1 with the tax stamp affixed to it. You need that for each NFA firearm that you're carrying with you. Probably not a bad idea to also have copies of whatever state laws govern those firearms. The ATF has an NFA handbook. You know, it's on PDF if you want to download that to your phone or print it off. It could get to be a lot of paper, so you kind of use your best judgment. But for sure, proof that the trust exists, proof who the trustees are, and copies of the tax stamps for each of the Class 3 firearms that you have with you.
Now, on the other side, from my perspective, if I was working and got a call of a loud noise complaint, a shooting complaint, and I've actually gotten these calls before where, yeah, there's guys shooting machine guns down there. Actually, someone called in a complaint on me shooting a machine gun. Just that fast. Didn't have a machine gun. But, the deputy or the conservation officer actually came out, saw that I had an SBR, and truthfully didn't really know what it was. So I actually kind of relayed that information on what the laws were, things like that. So it's important, be polite. They're 99.9% of cops aren't out there to jack you up or mess with you or whatever. They want to do a good job and be professional and be polite. But yeah, make sure you have a copy of that stamp. And you can get a reduced copy. You don't have to have the full size. This is a copy, it's laminated. But what I've started doing, and I recommend it to everybody else, is make a reduced copy. And if you have a few items, just make a small little binder that you keep in your range bag or your book, that book to put in the case of that gun or whatever. And you could easily put, a copy of your summary and maybe, a couple other pertinent documents in a reduced version. Now, you can carry that digitally. I know there's a lot of guys who, have that on their phone or maybe a tablet or something, but keep in mind, it's a lot easier sometimes just to have a paper copy, and with the reduced copies, it just makes it a lot easier. So just be polite. Say, hey, yep, this is a legally owned firearm. I'm a member of the trust. I'm a trustee. The trust owns this. Here's the necessary documents, and they might identify you to verify that the names match, things like that, but you'll probably be on your way shortly.
Sure.
So now let's talk about after death. What happens when the grantor, the creator of the trust, they pass away?
The trust is designed to distribute that property out fairly soon after the grantor passes. Doesn't necessarily always have to happen that way. If you have a beneficiary who's a minor, for example,
okay.
Or if they're incapacitated, maybe everyone was in a car accident, the grantor had passed and the beneficiaries didn't. The successor trustee can hold those firearms in trust for them until they either regain capacity or if it's a minor, until that minor turns 21. And then those firearms would be distributed. But that's not the only option. I mean, the only option is not giving the firearms to them directly. If the beneficiary has a trust themselves, the beneficiary can ask that the firearm be transferred to their gun trust rather than to them directly. Or you could have, if you want a really sophisticated trust, you can have something that will create like a dynasty trust. They'll create a family armory that your descendants will be the beneficiaries of and trustees will administer. You can fund that in a number of different ways. So you're not only going to pass them the firearms, mm-hmm. You're going to give them the financial means to maintain those firearms, pay for the ammunition to continue to use them. You can create incentives where you will give your descendants monetary incentives to do things like take hunter safety, take firearm training, get a carry permit. pay for your great-grandchildren who aren't even born yet, pay for their high school trap team. So literally anything that you can imagine as far as promoting firearms usage from descendants that don't even exist yet, you can do that with a trust. And it's a way really to pass on not just your stuff, but your values as well. So the sky's the limit really when it comes to that sort of trust planning. And that's the sort of stuff that really gets me excited about trust.
Well, that's neat that you can not only use it to take care of assets, but you can also kind of pass on a legacy.
Exactly.
You know, and that's cool. Now, you mentioned a dynasty trust. Was that the right term?
Yes.
So am I understanding that right? That when that trust creates another trust, so it's a trust creating trust?
Yes.
That's like the Skynet of trusts.
Yes. Trust can't continue forever. There are rules about how long a trust can last, and I'm not going to get into them because they really differ state by state. But several generations for sure. A trust could last, and it could provide firearms and give your kids an opportunity, great grandkids opportunities to use firearms, and pass on your values of safe firearm ownership.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize, that a trust is more and can be more. I mean, there's different levels like we talked about, but it can really be used more for just assets, but for some of that family planning, some of that estate planning, and that is what I think is the biggest reason for someone to look at a trust. You know, you can get a simple trust just to start with, just to own some items, and you can really evolve it to your needs to be multi-generational, as you mentioned. So yeah. I think that's just some really, really cool stuff. Guys, I hope you guys found this series helpful. I mean, this is incredibly awesome for Ben to take some time to be with us, to learn more about trusts. Ben, what else do you think we should know about trusts? Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
The one thing that I think a lot of folks don't consider about trust is incapacity. It's something that no one really likes to talk about, but eventually we're all going to get older. People get in car accidents, or you have strokes, whatever it might be. You can lose mental capacity. You can lose your legal capacity. If you're arrested, say you use your firearm in a defensive gun use, you get arrested and you want to get out of jail, one of the common conditions on your bail is that you can't possess firearms. If you have NFA firearms as an individual, that creates some problems because you can't give them to anyone else until the ATF approves your transfer paperwork, and right now that's running about 5 months. That's a long time to sit in jail waiting for your transfer paperwork to get processed. If you own those firearms in a trust, whether you lose capacity because of illness or injury or legal incapacity issues, you've got a successor trustee that can step in and take over the administration of those firearms. If you live alone or you live somewhere where they need to take possession of those firearms to safeguard them, they have the legal authority to do that. They don't have to go to court and get a conservator or a guardian appointed. They can do that instantly. You have a stroke at the range with your friend who is also your successor trustee. You go in the ambulance and they go home with the class 3 firearms that are in your trust. If those firearms need to be sold, because the bills aren't going to stop coming just because you can't go to work, your successor trustee has the discretion to sell those firearms if they need to. My trusts come with instructions that should be like sort of the last resort. Sure. But if they need to be sold, your successor trustee has the discretion and the authority to sell those, to provide for your care, for the care of your dependents, whatever it is that you need. And also, if you as the trustee of your trust, as folks get older, they suffer from dementia. They just don't know what's going on anymore. And that's one of the scariest things for a firearm owner, I think, is that you don't want to have your guns taken away by someone else that you don't have any control over that. One of the things that trust can do is you pick the trustees in your trust so that you can decide who's going to make that decision. When you get to the point in your life where you don't have control of your faculties anymore, you've picked ahead of time the folks that are going to make that decision for you, folks that you trust, that you can rely on, that are looking out for your best interest.
So you get the input while you are able to.
Right. Yeah. And I should stress that they're taking you out as a trustee. You're still the grantor of the trust. They're not going to sell your guns while you're in a nursing home or whatever. You still have control over that, but you wouldn't be able to possess them day to day.
Sure. Well, that's a lot of awesome knowledge, and your expertise is obvious. And again, a sincere thank you for coming on and just helping our viewers and just learn more about some of this stuff. It's been enlightening for me, and I hope it has been for you guys as well. Ben, if someone is in Minnesota and they want to trust, how do they get in touch with you?
The best way is probably just to go to the website, minnesotaguntrustlawyer.com. All my contact info is right there.
And you're based out of Oakdale, Minnesota, which is kind of on the east side of the Twin Cities. So again, that's minnesotaguntrustlawyer.com. We'll have a link in the description below. For those of our viewers that are not in Minnesota, where should they go looking for a good lawyer to make their trust?
The place I tell folks to go is to gunlawcommunity.com. There's a network of attorneys that I work with that we're on listservs and answering questions and in constant contact. You can find attorneys who are going to draft a quality gun trust that are licensed in your state. They're local, and they'll be available when you have questions. They'll give you, they'll treat you right.
That's gunlawcommunity.com. We'll also have a link to that in the description. So I hope this answers a lot of the questions that you had about trusts. Make sure you check out the other videos in this series where we talked about kind of Trust 101, 41F, and the process of the trust, which was covered in this video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please contact an attorney. We can't give you any legal advice. We might be able to answer some of the basic questions, but in reality, if you have trust-specific questions, please contact a professional attorney in your area. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you're shooting safely and have a great day.